Hello, and welcome to ANEC Sports' coverage of the 2025 Boys Basketball State Tournament. My name is Sam Frick. I'm the founder and editor at Around the Northeast Corner, covering 30 schools across Northeast Indiana and parts of Elkhart County. So for 3A, we're going to be looking at sectionals 24, 23, 22, 21, and sectional 20. We're really not going to talk too much about 19 due to time constraints and whatnot, but I was just going to go ahead and tell you right off the bat, I like St. Joseph in Sectional 19, although the matchup against South Bend Washington on Wednesday could be an intriguing match between two South Bend rival schools in the NIC. And also, we are going to be a little late on 4A because with 4A Sectional 4, Concord Warsaw play tomorrow night. We just don't have time to talk about 4A right now. So we will talk about 4A at a later date. But right now, our focus is on Class 3A. Let's go ahead and start off with Sectional 24, hosted by Newcastle, the famous Newcastle Fieldhouse. Many would argue it's the largest high school basketball gym in the entire country, if not the entire world, so to speak. It's just a beautiful spectacle down in Henry County. But Tuesday night will feature two doubleheader games. Jay County will take on Yorktown. Connorsville will take on Hamilton Heights in the night game of the doubleheader. Delta has the bye. They'll wait the Jay County Yorktown winner. Newcastle will get the bye, waiting the Connorsville Hamilton Heights winner. At ANEC Sports, we cover Jay County, so this sectional is relevant to us for that reason. The Jay County Patriots come in at 13-9. They enter the sectional on a good streak as of late. They have won 5 of their last 7 games, despite the fact that they've had to play the rest of the season with an interim head coach due to the sudden retirement of legendary head boys basketball coach Jerry Baumholt, who won over 600 games in his career that spans 4 decades, in which some of it came with the Jay County Patriots on 2 different stints. Jerry's team got off to a nice start this season, but unfortunately, because of a health scare that occurred before the Blackford game on February the 1st, he decided to retire out of precaution of his health and because it's for the best for him and his family. And we wish Jerry Baumholt the best in his retirement. While we are saddened by Jerry not being able to finish out the rest of the season because of his health, we do want to say thank you to Jerry for all of his contributions to high school basketball, and we wish him the very best in the rest of his retirement and his post-coaching career. But back to Jay County. Under Broden Gary, the interim head coach, the Patriots averaging 53 points per game. They're giving up 48 points per game, roughly on average. The Patriots do play a pretty decent schedule for ACAC standards, but obviously when you look at this sectional, this is a sectional with a lot of battle-tested teams like a Yorktown, a Connorsville, a Delta, a Newcastle that play these schools right near the Muncie area, the Anderson area, the Indy area of the woods. So Jay County does play in a hard sectional every year because of that. But the Patriots do have a nice team, and they're going to be one of the top-tier teams in this sectional, primarily because of their size. They are an incredibly tall team. They are very athletic at Jay County with this program, and this is a team that has a very balanced lineup. You look at their starting lineup at Jay County, a lot of these players can contribute in a variety of different ways. A lot of heights, a lot of athleticism. The big teams I mentioned earlier, a lot of players around 6 feet or taller at Jay County. This is a team that averages 28 rebounds per game, which is very good in high school basketball. 12 assists per game, mainly because they're such a balanced team. 9 steals, 2.6 blocks. A lot of that comes from their height. And they also run that 1-2-2 zone defense. And it's a beauty. I mean, at least over the years, and when Jerry Baumholt was the coach, they ran that 1-2-2, and it was just a chef's kiss. It's one of the greatest 1-2-2 zone defenses in the history of Indiana high school basketball. But in terms of scoring, Jay County has 4 players that average at least 8 points per game, 3 of which are double-figure scores. It's Tucker Griffin, Graydon Swelvin, Cole Forthofer, and Jaden Comer. Occasionally, you would have a sophomore in number 21. I believe that is Eli Petro. Yep, 6'7" power forward Eli Petro. You have Comer, a big point guard for the Patriots at 6'2". You have a solid wing in Tucker Griffin, 6'4", Swogman, one of their team captains, if not the team captain at Jay County. He's one of the team captains for sure. 6'7" guard, a massive guard for Jay County. 6'7" guard can do a variety of different ways. And then Cole Forthofer is a 6'9" center. So this Jay County is big, they're physical, and they're very athletic. They are a pretty battle-tested team. They nearly beat Wapahani in the regular season. They were competitive against Woodland despite the loss in that contest. They lost to Richmond by only 7 points. They lost to Bluffton by 1. That's a game they probably should have won. They led for most of that game until Declan Greaser hit that 3 at the buzzer to break the hearts of Jay County fans. They lost by 15 to a nice Blackford team. Lost by 1 to a good Heritage team. And they lost to Hamilton Heights, who is in their sectional, by 8 points, 72-64. They draw Yorktown in the first round of their sectional, a team that they defeated in the regular season, 42-36, back on February the 15th. The Yorktown Tigers, a pretty defense-first team. The thing with Yorktown is they have went through their slumps this year. They've had 2 major occurrences this year where they've lost multiple games in a row. If you look at the streak back on December the 13th, they had lost 7 in a row, it looks like there. And then entering postseason play since January the 18th or 17th, they've only won 1 game since the Delaware County tournament. And that was against Muncie Central back on February 18th. Outside of that, they have lost 9 of their last 10 games. So it's been a struggle for Yorktown. A lot of it with Yorktown has to do with the fact they just don't generate enough offense. And when you're playing against a team like Jay County that's big and physical, they run a good zone defense, the matchup doesn't fare all too well for Yorktown on paper, although they were competitive with Jay County in the regular season. But I think the big issue for Yorktown is they don't really have a player that you look at and say, yeah, that player is going to be a kid that's going to be able to knock down shots consistently, at least a healthy Yorktown player that knock down shots. Their leading healthy scorer for Yorktown is number 41, the junior for Yorktown, and that is Jabin Barnes, averaging 9 points per game. Nobody else scores more than 9 points. Everybody else is either 8 points or less. Rebounds, they only average 18 rebounds per game, so that's not a good matchup right there. But they do a good job taking care of the basketball, only 11 turnovers per game. But Yorktown's going to have to be able to crash the boards a little bit, at least not get destroyed in the glass. And they're going to have to be able to score a little bit. And that could be a problem for Yorktown. And I think that's why I think this matchup does favor Jay County on paper. Now, they would have to play Delta in the next round if they were to advance. And Delta has been a powerhouse over the years under Mark Detweiler. In his 8th season in Delta, 150 and 53. He's been coaching for 27 seasons. He's approaching 400 wins in his career. 385 is his current win total right now. And Delta has been a powerhouse for the past few years. Just last year they had a historic season, 23-7. Made it to the semi-state championship game where they lost in triple overtime to South Bend St. Joseph. The year before that, 22-23, 19-10, lost in the championship game of semi-state to Northwood, who would go on to win state. So this Delta program has been a powerhouse, and they've been a force to be reckoned with in central Indiana. 50 points per game is Delta's offense, and only giving up 45 points per game. They have lost their last 2 in a row, coming to Shelbyville and Oak Hill. But this is a Delta team that obviously they have a defense that travels well. They're obviously an athletic team, and this Delta program has a history of postseason success. They did graduate quite a few good players off of last year's team. They had Damari Hood and Jackson Wars off of that team last year. Johnny Manor was another one. All 3 of those guys I just mentioned, and even Kaden Bond to add another one there. All of them graduated from that team last season, so it's a pretty different lineup this year, led by Jordan Fernie, averaging 12.9 points, 3.2 assists, 2.1 steals, is the senior small forward for Delta. They still have Bronson Edwards, who's averaging 6 rebounds per game, the senior small forward. So they're a pretty big team. They're a pretty athletic team at Delta. And it's a team that's still pretty balanced overall. And you look at the scoring beyond Fernie, they have 2 other players that are averaging 10 points per game in Lucas Bragg, their shooting guard, and Bronson Edwards, the small forward. So again, they're big, they're athletic, they're a team that can that can knock down shots, at least from the interior, but they also can hit some threes. They're shooting 34% from three, where Jay County is a little bit streaky from downtown. Delta is pretty consistent, and Bragg has been the player. Bragg and Edwards have been the two players that have been the most consistent for Delta this year, shooting 38 and 37% from downtown, respectively. For the Delta Eagles, again, they're very good inside. The only thing with Delta is because they have a nice front court, they are a little bit more susceptible from the free throw line. Only 57% from the foul line. That'd be something to keep an eye on here. But the one other thing that Delta does very well, and they've done this for a couple years now, is they don't turn the ball over. Only 9 turnovers per game this season for the Delta Eagles. So if Jay County is going to have any chance of competing with Delta, they have got to take care of the basketball because of Delta's athleticism, because they don't shoot themselves in the foot, and they played an incredible defensive game for the Delta Eagles. On the bottom half of the bracket, Connorsville, Hamilton Heights is the other matchup I mentioned earlier. Connorsville 9-14, 43 points per game. They are giving up 52 points, so this is an offense that has struggled to put the ball in the basket, and then that's part of the reason why their second half has been ice cold as of late. Only 2 wins for Connorsville since January the 18th. They've been competitive at times. They've lost some close games, but in the end of the day, the Connorsville Spartans have struggled to put the ball in the basket, and if the Spartans are going to be able to have a decent playoff run this season, they have to be able to score some points in this sectional, or it's going to be a short postseason for Connorsville. And the opponent they're facing is Hamilton Heights. When we talked about Connorsville being a team that struggles to shoot the basket to score points, Hamilton Heights is the opposite of that. They are an offensive team. They average 62 points per game. They're giving up 56. 14-8 is Hamilton Heights. They are a team that's also pretty battle-tested. They've played Noblesville. They've played Guerin Catholic. They have played Muncie Central. They've played Western, who's in 3A23. They've played West Lafayette. They played Paoli. They played Mechaniqua, who has Josiah Ball. They've played Westfield and Lebanon, Lapel, Frankfurt not so much. Tipton is a decent team still. And obviously they've played Jay County, who they beat by 8 points. And this Hamilton Heights team, like I said, very good basketball team. Kind of like Delta in a way. They have players that can knock down shots, and they're a talented team. They've had some history of success as well at Hamilton Heights, which is down in the Madison County area of the woods. So it's right down near the Indy metro area. But they are led by a very talented scorer in senior wing Gavin Saunders, who's averaging 19.2 points per game. Reese Knapp averages 10.5 per game. So they have 2 players that can consistently score points for this Hamilton Heights team. Saunders also averages 3.9 rebounds, 1.3 assists, 2.1 steals per game. So his defense is obviously a big-time notice for the Huskies. Knapp averages 2.6 rebounds, 1.3 assists per game. When you look at this Husky team, decent rebounding team for Hamilton Heights. They do share the ball very well, 13.7 assists per game. As I mentioned, Saunders and Knapp have 1.3 assists. They have a solid guard on this team that averages 4.4 assists per game in Tyler Champion. He's their point guard, and they have a combo guard in Carson Felder at 2.4 assists per game. So this team is very selfless. They're not a very selfish team. They got players that can share the well, if you would. And this is a team that, again, kind of like with Delta, they don't shoot themselves in the foot. Only 10 turnovers per game, so they don't make mistakes. Shooting 46% from the floor. They are shooting 37% from three. So they're very similar to Delta in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons why is the 2-level scoring threat of Saunders and Knapp, both shooting over 40% from three. And so when you're scouting Hamilton Heights or you're preparing for Hamilton Heights, obviously the big concern is, how do you stop those 2 players at Hamilton Heights? If you don't stop them, it's obviously going to be very difficult to beat this Hamilton Heights team. 63% from the foul line. That's probably their one weakness for sure. And Hamilton Heights, they're not a fantastic rebounding team, but they're also not a great free throw shooting team as well. But again, they don't turn the ball over too much, and they have a decent offense, so it doesn't really hurt too much there. I will say this. I think I like Hamilton Heights on paper as well against Connorsville, so I like their chances of advancing. They would play Newcastle in the semifinal game, I should say. And obviously Newcastle's the host. It's a dynamic atmosphere at Newcastle. 8-14 in the season. They're averaging 54 points, giving up 57 under 12th-year head coach Daniel Kotz, who's won 162 games at the historic Newcastle High School. Now, they did go off to a very slow start in Newcastle. They only won one game through January 3rd, so if my math is correct, that would be 1-7 through January 3rd. They've played much better basketball as of late, so since then, they have posted a record of 7-7 since that start. However, Newcastle is going into the sectional tournament with a 5-game losing streak. And with Newcastle, a lot of it with Newcastle is they've lost a lot of close games this year. For the Newcastle Trojans, they do play a pretty tough schedule. They played Jay County, lost to them in double overtime. They played Northeastern, they lost to them in overtime. Lost to Hamilton Heights by 8 points. Lost to Marion by 7 points. That's a pretty good basketball team at Marion. They lost to Shelbyville by 9. Let's see here. Lost to Franklin County by 9. Delta by 12. Pendleton Heights by 4. LaPel by 7. Muncie Central by 3. So they have been battle tested and they've been close on several occasions. So if you're looking for a team that could potentially pull off an upset in this sectional, I think Newcastle is certainly a team to watch in this sectional because they have been competitive. They've been close several times. And with Newcastle being at home, it does matter when you're playing in a stadium or a gym, I should say, that seats nearly 10,000 seats. That does matter a lot. Most schools only get around 3,000 or 4,000 seats. Newcastle is about nearly triple of that. That's how big their stadium is. And when it comes to Newcastle, it's going to be what happens with Landon Thompson, the combo forward of Newcastle, averaging 16.7 points, 8.4 rebounds, 1 steal per game. He's pretty much their go-to player for the Trojans in the post, and that's going to be the guy that's going to have to lead away in this postseason for Newcastle to win a sectional. They do have 2 other players, however, that do complement him pretty well in Mason Miller, their combo guard, averaging 14 points per game, and then he got a nice power forward or center in Elijah Turner, averaging 12 points per game. So obviously the front court of Newcastle is very good for the Trojans, and then they have a point guard that can feed the ball in the post quite well. They don't rebound the ball that great, so that's something to keep an eye on is what happens in the glass. They are a pretty scrappy team at Newcastle, so they are a pretty tough team. I know the numbers don't show that, but they are a pretty tough team with 11.9 assists, 4 steals per game, but it's a pretty tough team. I mean, when you've been as competitive as Newcastle's been this year, you're a pretty tough team. Again, just like the other teams, they don't make too many mistakes, 12.8 turnovers per game. Pretty good number for Newcastle. So obviously the big thing for Newcastle is can they win those close games? They've lost a ton of close games this year, and that's why the Trojans' record is 8-14. They're shooting 48% from the floor, 31% from 3. They do have about 3 or 4 kids that can knock down shots from distance. That is something to keep an eye on here. And also 68% from the foul line. There's quite a few teams in the sectional that don't shoot very well from the free throw line. Newcastle, if they get to the foul line and if calls go in their way, that could be something to keep an eye on in the sectional. But obviously they're going to have to play good defense inside, and then they're going to have to be able to take care of the basketball, do the little things right, and then they're going to have to rely on their post presence to do its magic in the postseason. So I think when you look at this sectional overall, I like Delta in the top half of the bracket, although Jay County will have a chance in this sectional. I think they have a nice team that can compete with Delta and Hamilton Heights and Newcastle, but obviously the competition does favor Delta on paper. Hamilton Heights will be a team to watch in this sectional. So I'm going to go Delta in the top half of the bracket. I could see Newcastle upsetting Hamilton Heights, but I am going to say the Huskies do squeak by Newcastle. So we have a Delta Hamilton Heights sectional final. And for my prediction, I'm going to go with Delta in this one. Real quick, I want to touch base on sectional 23 at Logansport because I'll be quite honest with you. To me, it comes down to what happens in the bottom half of the bracket. Either Maconaquah or West Lafayette likely wins this sectional. And when you have Maconaquah at 17-5, they have this really good player by the name of Josiah Ball, one of the top scorers in the state of Indiana. Very, very good basketball player for the Maconaquah Braves, who clinched a share of the TRC alongside the Manchester Squires. And so obviously the Maconaquah Braves are a team that has the credibility to play with anybody. Josiah Ball is a Bethel College commit, so he's going to be going to a really good program at the next level alongside, in the same league as Gavin Bennett, who's going to be going to Grace College. So the rivalry between Gavin Bennett and Josiah Ball is only going to intensify at the collegiate level. Josiah Ball averaging 28.6 points per game, 47% from the floor. He's approaching 2,000 career points, so he sits away from getting the 2,000 point mark. Very likely going to get that mark as soon as Tuesday nights. He is shooting 37% from three, career 33% three-point shooter. He is shooting 82% of the foul line, 6.4 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 2.5 steals is Josiah Ball. This is a very good Mechanical team that I mentioned earlier, and because they are a high-octane offense, 72 points per game, this team's obviously going to be one of the top contenders in the sectional because of that. They've played some good teams. They've been tested. They've had some overtime games, about 4 overtime games this year, which came against Peru, Western, Southwood, and Manchester, 2 of which are in the sectional with Peru and Western, both going to double overtime. McConaughey does play Western on Tuesday nights. The Western Panthers are currently 13-10. They play a pretty tough defense, but obviously when you're playing McConaughey, you're not going to be able to slow down this team, so you're going to have to be able to score some points. But again, because Western's been competitive, you have to give them a chance against McConaughey in this section. McConaughey's defense hasn't been perfect. They do give up 61 points per game, so there is a scenario where if McConaughey doesn't make their shots or their defense doesn't get the job done, it could potentially lead to an upset. So here's the thing I look at here. McConaughey could easily win this sectional. They could also easily lose this sectional because of that. Western is definitely a team to keep an eye on in the sectional. The other team to watch here is West Lafayette. John Harrell does like West Lafayette quite a bit alongside McConaughey. They're averaging 63 points per game, giving up just under 54 points per game. Are the West Lafayette Red Devils, who have only lost 3 games since January the 11th. So this is a West Lafayette team that's red hot right now, representing the Hoosier Conference. And when you're talking about West Lafayette, you're talking about a hotbed of basketball in the Tippecanoe County neck of the woods. And West Lafayette is obviously a very talented team. They are pretty tough team for a team that scores quite a few points. They do play some pretty good defense, so that is something to keep an eye on in this sectional. I looked at the top half of the bracket. I could see Peru, a team that's won a sectional in each of the last, I think, 4 years now at Peru. If I remember right, Peru has won every sectional since 2022, so they have won 3 in a row, I should say, at Peru, but they were in a different sectional at that time. This is a different field this time around, and it's probably a sectional that does not favor Peru all that much, even though I think they'll have a chance against Twin Lakes in sectional play. So don't rule out Peru in sectional play here. So I could see Peru or Twin Lakes advance to Saturday nights. Logansport, while they are a historically great program at Logansport, they're not necessarily the greatest team these days at Logansport. Just 8-15 on the season, even though this is a team that's pretty battle tested at Logansport. I don't think they're particularly the greatest team out there. I know, even though they did beat Twin Lakes by 6 points, I guess there's a chance there. But obviously, if it's Peru, I probably like Peru's chances a little bit more than Logansport, even though I don't think it's going to be a 29-point win for Peru if that was the case. So I think the teams in the top half of the bracket are going to battle each other out. So I think it comes down to McConaughey or West Lafayette, in my opinion. Northwestern, I think, got a pretty bad draw, in my opinion. I don't think I like their chances against West Lafayette in this sectional. So I think it boils down to, can the West Lafayette Red Devils hold off Josiah Ball just enough to get past the sectional? And McConaughey, when you look at their postseason history, they have not won a sectional championship since the year 2000. A lot of it is they just have been struggling to get past either a Belmont or a Norwell or Oak Hill or Peru, or even during the 2010s, they had some trouble with Twin Lakes or West Lafayette. So that's something they're going to have to deal with once again. West Lafayette has a tradition of success in basketball, and this is a West Lafayette team that won the sectional last year, so they are definitely going to be a team to keep an eye on here. I'm probably going to take West Lafayette just because I don't know if I can say McConaughey is a better team than West Lafayette for 4 quarters. I don't know what Concord was a team that I look at and say they're a team that can win all 3 rounds and win a sectional championship, because if Josiah Ball doesn't play the level of Josiah Ball, or the McConaughey's defense doesn't perform well, it could smell bad news for the Braves. So I'm probably going to take West Lafayette in this one. Take a look at 3A Sectional 22, hosted by the Belmont Braves. And in this sectional, there are 6 teams in this sectional. Tuesday night will be a doubleheader. First with Mississinawa and Norwell on Tuesday nights. Marion will face Belmont in the nightcap of that doubleheader. New Haven got the bye. They will face the Ole Miss Norwell winner. Heritage got the bye, and they'll play the Marion Belmont winner. I would say on paper, when you look at this sectional, the team that really jumps out to me is the Marion Giants. And a lot of it is the Marion Giants always playing in the NCC, and Marion's style of basketball is very different from a lot of teams in this section. A lot of these teams in this sectional don't have the athletes or necessarily the competition to keep up with a Marion-like team. Now, Marion does take their lumps because they play a brutal schedule, and that's the thing with Marion, is because you're one of the most successful boys basketball programs in the history of the IHSAA, you're going to play a very brutal schedule. James Blackman Sr. has always built a difficult schedule because he wants his teams ready for the playoffs. And Bishop Luers fans know a lot about the Blackman family history over the years, and guess what? So does the Marion fan base. Both of these schools are very much familiar with the Blackman family tradition. And when it comes to Marion, a lot of the success will hinge on their high-octane offense. They run a run-and-gun type of offense. They're incredibly talented. It's almost like a college-like offense, if you would, because they're such a gifted team. They got a lot of players that can make plays, but the 2 names that really come up at Marion are Tim Jones and Amar Rogers. Tim Jones averages 19.7 points per game, shooting 47% from the floor, 4.9 rebounds, 2.9 assists, 4.5 steals. And then you have Amar Rogers, a shooting guard for the Marion Giants. And the senior is averaging 14.9 points on 47% shooting, 33% from 3. I believe he leads the team in 3-point shooting. 2.7 rebounds, 1.2 assists, 2 steals for Amar Rogers. Now, because of Marion's team the way it is a pretty top-heavy team. So, obviously, the thing with Marion is a lot of it's going to hinge on Jones and Rogers, even Barnes to some level. You know, what can Smith do to provide that extra level of depth? They're going to have to stay healthy. That's the big thing for Marion. They don't have a very deep bench overall when it comes to offensive productivity. They're going to have to stay out of foul trouble because essentially, since they play a short bench. Marion does rebound the ball decently well, but I think that is to be expected when you have a lot of athletes in Marion. You do expect to rebound pretty well, 23 rebounds per game, 10 assists per game. One thing I will say with Marion is even though they are giving up 67 points per game, they are an incredibly scrappy team at Marion, and that's to be expected. James Blackman has always been known for having teams that are scrappy. They're an extremely scrappy team, 12.5 steals per game, 2.8 blocks. That shows a lot of their athleticism at Marion. They do struggle with consistency, and you can, if you've seen their schedule, Marion goes through their winning streaks, they go through their losing streaks, but a lot of it has to do with their schedule, with the way it's built. They build a schedule that's prepared for them for the playoffs. It's very much a 4A heavy schedule at Marion. They are shooting 43% from the floor, 29% from 3. They do take quite a few threes, so that is to be expected at Marion. They are a 62% foul shooting team, so that is something to keep an eye on if it gets to a point where it's a physical game, and there are some teams in the sectional can play a physical style of basketball, one of which is Belmont. And while Belmont is not the team that they were last year where they won 20 games, they won a share of the NE8, all that shebang, Belmont is pretty tough. They're a much tougher team than many would expect for a 5-win team. They got Gavin Kroll, who's one of the top shooters in Northeast Indiana at Belmont. And then you got this really nice freshman named Daniel Selking. I almost said Peyton Selking, but that's the coach. Daniel Selking is the player I'm referring to. He is a kid that can get you 3 or 4 threes in a game, even a quarter per se, because he's just such a talented knockdown shooter for the Belmont Braves. The issue with Belmont, and it really does boil down to the fact they did graduate a lot from last year, Belmont's bench is also not very deep at all. I think there's only a couple of kids I look at and say, yeah, those kids, kid here can possibly perform. That would be Will Baker, right? Or you have Cameron Summers, are two names I know for sure can definitely pick up and elevate their game at Belmont for sure. But again, the quality of offensive consistency goes down quite a bit after that. Because again, you lost Andrew James from last year, you lost Jet Scheinman. Those kids graduated. So obviously, this is a far cry from that team of a year ago. So if Belmont is going to somehow compete in this game, obviously they're going to have to make shots. You're not going to be able to defend Marion just because Marion is so gifted, athletically speaking. You're going to have to make shots. But because Marion plays that fast tempo type of offense, it also opens up opportunities for a Belmont to make shots. But if Belmont doesn't make their shots early and often, it's probably going to be a blowout in favor of Marion just because of that. Top half of the bracket will be Mississinawa and Norwell. These two met earlier in the season. That was during the opening weeks of the season, about December 3rd, that these two teams met. It was a 41-34 Norwell win at the Castle against the Mississinawa Indians. And kind of like Belmont to an extent, although I think Norwell has done a better job of adapting to this year's team. And Norwell's got a more experienced team this year than Belmont does. But Norwell is a younger team. They did graduate quite a bit from last year's team. But obviously you still have Adam McBride back for his senior year. But you also have his brothers playing as a sophomore and freshman, respectively. You have Nick McBride, who is a sophomore. Josh McBride is a freshman. And so they're averaging 46 points per game. But I would say roughly 40 points out of the 46 are from those three kids. So a lot of Norwell's success offensively. Anyway, as I was saying, so Norwell is going to rely very much on Adam, Josh, and Nick McBride on this team. This is a team that basically only plays 6 players deep on this varsity roster. So for Norwell, obviously, they're going to have to play disciplined basketball, and they're going to need the McBrides to do their thing because this Mississinawa team is historically a pretty scrappy team. And obviously, the Ole Miss Indians last year had a nice run to the sectional finals before they fell at the hands of Peru in the sectional championship game. So Mississinawa does have a history of postseason success, at least in the sectional formats. Obviously, not that many years of success beyond sectionals, but Ole Miss, pretty balanced team as well. And this is a team that's, led by Ravion Fetz and Keontae Woods. They got a couple of guys that can make some plays and be able to shoot the ball pretty decently well. They're 33% from three, pretty decent three-point shooting team. Not a fantastic free throw shooting team. There's nothing overly special with Ole Miss, but I think they're a pretty balanced team overall. They're a tough team. They play hard, and that's something you always expect with Ole Miss. The only thing I worry about with Ole Miss is they don't do enough in terms of getting after the ball handler and forcing turnovers. That could be something that could be a disadvantage for Ole Miss against a team like Norwell that does milk a lot of clock on their offense. And this is a team that does generally play a pretty patient style of offense. They'll run clock if they need to, and that sometimes can frustrate opponents because of the way Norwell runs that very clean, fundamentally sound offensive style of basketball at Norwell. And it's also a team at Norwell that plays pretty good defense, 48 points per game on their scoring defense. So this is a team that generally doesn't give up a lot of points because teams aren't able to get enough possession, number one. And then number two, they struggle with Norwell's ability to utilize their active hands. So it frustrates ball handlers to be able to run their offense and get good shots that they need, right, or what they want. And so obviously Ole Miss and Norwell are going to battle that. It's probably a coin toss. I could see this go either way. I still like Norwell on paper, but I could see Ole Miss winning this one as well. New Haven would await the winner of this game, and obviously with New Haven, they are the NEA co-champions, averaging 62 points per game. They're giving up 63 under first-year head coach Brandon Appleton, who has had years under his belt at Angola. Now he finds himself at New Haven, and it's a team that is high-motored, very athletic, very physical defense. They run that that full court press, and that is something that always gets teams overwhelmed. Is they are fast, they're quick, and they run that press that Brandon Appleton's been known for so many years. And lately, they've been able to lock down on defense because they've been able to be in sync with their defensive pressure. They've been able to find a consistent identity on both ends of the floor, be able to play at a level that's beyond the basic needs for a basketball team. And then you got several players that can flat out make plays. Jamal Lawrence is kind of their dual threat two-way player for New Haven. He can make plays. He can get to the basket. He can knock down shots, but he is incredibly tough defensively. He thrives on the defensive pressure as Jamal Lawrence, the senior, waiting for his opportunity to shine, and you're seeing it now this year for him. Jadrian Ezel is a sharpshooter that can drive to the baskets. You got Tavar Baskerville, who's the floor general of New Haven, incredibly talented kid that can go off at any moment, but he's also incredibly selfless and knows how to see the floor and finding players around him to be able to be successful. New Haven has a pretty good bench, and that's something that most of the sectional doesn't have. Is New Haven has multiple players they can go to make a play, get a stop, and be able to provide the things they need for them to succeed. The thing with New Haven, and it really is the big X factor for New Haven, is they're going to have to be able to make their free throws. They're not a very good free throw shooting team, and that has struggled, and that has come back to bite them a couple times this season. They are also a little bit susceptible to turnovers. That's one other thing they'll have to be careful with New Haven. And at times with New Haven, they sometimes settle shots a little bit. So can New Haven provide a balanced offense, right? Can they make sure they don't have too many breakdowns defensively, and then you don't want to be in a situation where you're missing opportunities because of missed layups, turnovers, or free throws for that nature. But obviously New Haven has a chance of winning a sectional, and I think they are a team that probably are best suited to compete with Marion, because I think the style of Marion is very similar to New Haven. So I think if we get a New Haven Marion sectional championship game, I think it would be an exciting sectional final at Belmont if we were to see these two battle each other out. Heritage is the other team that has the bye, and like New Haven, Heritage has a pretty deep team. They run 7 or 8 guys that can make plays for them, and obviously with Heritage, they're going to bow down to the guards of Landon Lieberger and Torian Brown. They are the two big playmakers for the Heritage Patriots, but they do have Lonte Castle. That is a nice dual threat forward for the Heritage Patriots. They do have some pretty hard-nosed kids that play hard-nosed defense, play physical basketball. And then you got a couple seniors like Brandon Walter, who thrives on the defensive pressure, thrives on defense as a senior leader. They have Tagulis for Heritage, Eli Tagulis, who is a nice athlete himself, although more so of a football player than a basketball player, but still an integral role of this team as a senior. Davian Bates is another one at the power forward position, 6'2" senior. Lucas Taylor comes off the bench, can make some shots as well for the Heritage Patriots. But obviously the Heritage, they're going to have a pretty tough matchup, whoever they face, whether it's Belmont or Marion, although more so with Marion just because Marion is probably the superior team of the two. But Heritage is a team that I think Marion has to be careful overlooking, just because if a healthy Lieberger or Torian Brown comes in and is a factor in the sectional, I think Marion could have some trouble with Heritage in that second round matchup. But I think Heritage is going to have to play good defense. They're going to have to be able to win the battle inside. And I think the big thing for Heritage is they're going to need to be able, again, kind of like what I said with Belmont, they're going to have to be able to make shots. Because when you play the Marion Giants, you have to be able to match their offensive capabilities. Otherwise, Marion is just going to blow you out. And so Heritage is going to have to be able to knock down shots. So when it's all said and done with this sectional, I think New Haven's the favorite to come out of the top half of the bracket. Bottom half of the bracket, I think, is a little bit more of a coin toss, because I do think Heritage might have a chance of upsetting Marion. But at the end of the day, I think Marion's just too athletic. In the end, I think Marion does somehow get the edge and advance to Saturday, which leads to a New Haven Marion sectional final. I would be fascinated to see who comes out on top in this one. I really don't have any idea who wins this sectional ultimately. I'm leaning towards Marion. I think they're a pretty battle-tested team, and I think Marion's athletes are pretty good. Maybe they're not as deep as New Haven, but they do have enough playmakers, and they are scrappy. I think Marion somehow, gets it done in the end. I think It's probably a 2-3 score game if it's New Haven. Even if it's Norwell, I think there's even a chance that maybe Norwell can give Marion some trouble as well. But in the end, I'm leaning towards Marion in this one. 3A Sectional 21 is at Garrett, and this is probably the most anticipated sectional of the ones we're covering at ANEC Sports for Class 3A. And Tuesday night will feature Angola and Garrett at 6 o'clock. Leo and DeKalb will be the nightcap on Tuesday. And then Wednesday will feature another doubleheader. Bishop Dwayner against East Noble. Blackhawk Christian against Concordia is the night game of the Wednesday doubleheader. Angola and Garrett have already faced each other twice this season, as this is one of the top rivalries in Northeast Indiana. Angola comes in at 15-7. They came one game shy of sharing the Northeast Corner Conference with Westview because, well, they lost to Lakeland just last Friday, 45-42. This is a team that's played a lot of close games. They've played in 6 overtime games this year, which is tied for second most all time in IHSA history. So this team has been familiar with close games. And with Angola in this sectional, they're going to have to be able to once again find a way to win close games, because this Garrett team is a monster. They are a freight train. No pun intended with the Garrett Railroaders, and Angola has already faced them twice. Both times they were physical. Both times they were close games. Angola won the first meeting in the regular season 56-44 at Angola. They lost to Garrett in overtime in the conference tournament 56-55. So these two teams have known each other quite a bit. It's one of the oldest rivalries in Northeast Indiana. And these are two teams with that have a nice young core that are setting themselves up for nice success in the future. With Angola, for Angola to succeed, it all starts and ends with Niles Knotts. He averages 13.8 points per game, right around 6 or 7 rebounds. Niles Knotts is the guy for Angola. And for the Hornets to be successful, he's got to be the integral part of this team, right? Because this Angola team is still pretty young. They are a pretty athletic team as a whole. They're an incredibly resilient team. They are a scrappy team. But Angola does struggle to find another guy that can play at the level of a Niles Knotts. And I guess the only other player that can contribute at a decent rate would be Ryan Stuckey, who is kind of the engine of Angola's defensive intensity from the backcourt, so to speak. And he's a tough kid. He plays with energy. He plays with pride. At Angola, averaging 9 points per game. He can knock down shots. He can get you some tough buckets. He's a kid that's got the clutch ability, if you would, for Ryan Stuckey. Even last year, he showed some of that as well. So those two guys are going to have to be integral for Angola's success, as well as Tommy Kaz with the point guard position. He's going to have to run the offense pretty well against a physical Garrett team on Tuesday night. And then they're going to need at least one other guy to step up at the plate, whether it's a Crew Weber, or if it's a Kyler Husher, or if it's a Tyler Ruppel. And that's something we've seen over the past several games at Angola. They found somebody to step up at a given point or an opportune time, so to speak. And so this Angola team is going to need to continue that on Tuesday. Hopefully Niles Knotts is 100%, because I know late in that Lakeland game, he didn't finish out 100% in that game health-wise. Hopefully he's okay and is able to play at the level he's capable of playing on Tuesday night, because we love to see Niles Knotts be able to play in the playoffs against this Garrett team that is having an incredible season, one of the great seasons in Garrett history, their most successful season since 2004. They finished undefeated home for the first time since 1972. This Garrett team, I mean, look at this Garrett team, like 18-6 on the season. This team couldn't even sniff 10 wins for 8 years at Garrett? I mean, we're talking 2015 was the last time they had 10 wins. 2014 was the last time they had a winning season at Garrett. I mean, it's been a long road for Garrett to get to this point, but Logan Traylor has become probably the coach of the year in Northeast Indiana, all things considered, because this Garrett team wasn't expected to be this good. We knew they were going to be good. We knew they were going to be better than they have been in the past. But this Garrett team has been a special team to watch this year. 54 points per game, giving up 47. And when it comes to Garrett, it really hinges on 3 guys that lead the way for Garrett, and that is Carter Kaufman, Isaiah Keene, and Parker Reed. Reed's a senior, but Keene and Kaufman are just sophomores, and they are fantastic players. Isaiah Keene leads the conference in scoring, averaging 16 points per game. And while Isaiah Keene is a 6'5" player, for Garrett, and a transfer out of the Fort Wayne Hawks homeschool program. He is a 6'5" guard. So Isaiah Keene doesn't just go around the rim and score inside. Isaiah Keene will take his shots, and he is very good when he's on. And that's something about this Garrett team that a lot of people are starting to take notice with this team. This Garrett team can knock down shots at a high rate, something we have not seen in years with the Garrett Railroaders. Is the playmaking and the explosive scoring ability of Keene and Kaufman. Both Keene and Kaufman tied the single-game sophomore record for scoring with 34 points. They did it in 2 different games. That tells you just how dangerous and talented this Garrett team is. You have Keene at 16 points, Kaufman at 15.2, Reed at 9.3, and then you got guys like Gagne and Smith and Hippensteel and Hedges that kind of chip in here and there. And that's kind of, and then Fuentes, and that kind of is the roundabout with this Garrett offense. From a rebounding standpoint, this is a very tough team. It's a physical Garrett team. You wouldn't know that by their high-octane offense, but this team is physical. 31.5 rebounds per game, 11 on the offensive side. So this team thrives in the glass. This team is physical. They're incredibly athletic, and they play a really high pace of play when it comes to their tempo. And it's a team that's selfless. They get after ball handlers. They're physical. They contest shooters. This is a good team. And if there's going to be a team that's going to compete with Blackhawk Christian in this sectional potentially, and again, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Garrett's road to the sectional finals if they were to get to Saturday. Garrett does have a team that's capable of competing with Blackhawk Christian. They are shooting 42% of the floor, so they can be a little streaky. They do take a lot of three-point shots. Even for a team as big as they are, they do take quite a few threes, about 380 of them. So they're shooting 32% from three. A lot of it comes from Isaiah Keene and Carter Kaufman, both shooting 30% or better. Reed shooting 33%. So they have 3 guys that can knock down shots. Hippensteel occasionally can hit some shots from 3 as well. So Garrett does have the shot-making ability. 65% of the foul line. They can be a little bit inconsistent from the free throw line, but overall, this is a pretty darn good Garrett team. One thing to keep an eye on, however, is at times when Garrett is sloppy, they can be very sloppy, but when they are taking care of the basketball and they're playing an efficient game, they do tend to do a good job at that. But there have been a couple of times this year where they've been a little bit susceptible to turnovers. Something to keep an eye on Tuesday when they play Angola. The other matchup will be Leo and DeKalb. Both Leo and DeKalb have been up and down this year. Leo 11-10, DeKalb 8-15. Both teams have had their ups and downs, but overall, both teams are capable of making a run to the sectional championship. Leo under Derek Heinen are probably the more talented team of the two. You got Sol Richer, who's one of the top wing players in all of Northeast Indiana. Just a really good player representing the Leo Lions of the Northeast States. You got Jair Sampson, who does have the moments where he can make some plays and be a bucket getter for Leo. And then you got Nolan Heitschuh, the floor general of the Leo Lions, who can knock down some shots. And then they got a guy like a Wallace, like a Colton Wallace or Grant Johnson that can make shots as well for Leo. And for the Lions, they're going to need to showcase more of their capabilities on Tuesday because they have been inconsistent. I'm not sure if it's because they're struggling a little bit to adapt to Derek Heinen's vision of the team. I'm not sure if it's just you have so many moving pieces with this team that they're just not gelling as quickly as one would expect it to. But either way, Leo does need to figure something out soon, because if Leo wants to extend their season, we need to see the better Leo team this week, or there's no chance they're winning the sectional because of the team that we're going to be talking about next. After we talk about this matchup, is a formidable opponent in the sectional. DeKalb, well, it's pretty much the same thing with DeKalb that we've been talking about for years now. They just don't play consistent basketball under Marty Beasley. At times with DeKalb, they can play a pretty good game. They can be a team that can run their offense pretty well. You got 3 or 4 guys like Kaden Rice and Brady Vince and Kaden Hinkle, right? That can, and Dalton Kotz, that can provide some good scoring, can get some good decent boards, can provide different challenges to opposing teams because they run an offense that does require patience, does burn a lot of clock, and they can shoot the three decently well enough that they can be a, a problem in a matchup like this one where you're playing against a Leo team that isn't really consistent. And DeKalb has been competitive at times because they're a scrappy team. They play hard, and they are a team that does have some decent athletes, although I think DeKalb does struggle with they do struggle to have that one player that can really just take over a game. DeKalb really doesn't have that. And that's one thing that could be a detriment for DeKalb on paper. The thing with DeKalb, and again, a lot of it DeKalb is they don't always show their potential. They are also a team that struggles with fundamentals. And it's been going on for quite some time now that DeKalb somehow still struggles with some of the basic things that for some reason it just completely scratches your head. I still don't understand why they struggle with some of their breakdowns on both ends of the floor, but we still are talking about it today. And if we're going to see the Cal team that's going to make a run, it's going to have to happen now. And if the Cal wants to make a run this Saturday night, they got to play better than what they've shown at times this year. And so I do have concerns of whether or not we're going to see the better the Cal team on the floor, just because I have seen more doubts about the Cal than been positives. Because even though they have the athletes per se, and Marty Beasley is a Hall of Fame coach, but the issue is they don't have a team that is fundamentally sound. They're not a team that has a guy or two that can make plays consistently or take over games. And they struggle with an identity either on offense or defense. And that's a problem when you're playing a sectional that has a lot of talented players and some talented teams, is you can't have a team that struggles with fundamentals in the sectional. And that's why I struggle with the Cal. And part of the reason why I know they almost beat Leo in the regular season, and they could beat Leo in the sectional here. I just don't feel very good about their chances in this sectional, just because I haven't seen enough of the Cal to tell me that I'm going to see the better team in the sectional. Dwayne, they're a one-win team. I don't think they're that bad of a basketball team. I know they're 1-21, but I do think they are more of a competitive team than I think the record would show you. Under Brandon O'Leary, they've had some close losses this year. I mean, you're talking about, the Peru game was decently competitive. New Haven was competitive. Lures game was competitive, and that's a very good Bishop Lures team. They were only lost by 20 to Blackhawk. So for a team that only has one win, they are pretty competitive against Blackhawk Christian. East Snowball was a 17-point loss, and you could argue the only reason it was 17-point game was because Riker Quate he just went bananas that game. I think he had 7 threes in that contest. And so you could argue that was probably one of the only reasons East Snowball won by that many points, was they just couldn't miss from 3. And that's who they'll face on Wednesday nights. Leo was a 9-point game, 57-48. They only lost to Woodland by 8, who just won the ACAC. They only lost to Northwood by 7. Only lost to Belmont by 9. So they are a competitive team. I don't think they're that bad of a team. So I think Easton has got to be very careful about overlooking Bishop Dwayner in this sectional. But I do think if the better East Noble team does show up in this game, East Noble should advance. But I always worry about Bishop Dwayner when they're the underdogs. I always worry about that. So I do stress caution for East Noble fans. Do not celebrate too early in this matchup, because Dwayner does have a history of making a run in the postseason. Now, when East Noble plays their best basketball, they're very good. They got excellent players around them with Riker Quate and Nathan Boker in the point guard position. You got Kobe Ritchie in the post. You have Mason Trish alongside Nathan Boker. Riker Quate's kind of the do-it-all forward at the 3 slot. You just come into Huntington University. So East Noble's got a really good starting 5, but obviously for East Noble, they are pretty young beyond the starting 5, so they do need to be careful about fouls, because their bench has shown when East Noble wasn't 100%, their bench is, well, let's just say it's not very good. So they got to make sure they stay healthy. They got to stay out of foul trouble. And then the big thing for East Noble is they got to be able to showcase a good balance of 3-point shooting, but also be able to score inside. They can showcase those two things alongside being able to get after defensively and force turnovers. I think East Snowball's got a very good chance of making it, at least make it to Friday nights against very likely Blackhawk Christian on Friday. East Noble, since they started the year 1-5, they have won 12 of their last 16 games. So this East Noble team is very good right now. Blackhawk Christian should beat Concordia. All due respect to Concordia, I know that the Cadets are not that bad of a 5-18 team, but they are playing Blackhawk Christian. There's just no chance they're beating Blackhawk whatsoever. So Blackhawk Christian comes in the midst, and we're going to try and make this one as quick as possible because I am talking quite a bit here. 21-3 on the season are the Blackhawk Christian Braves. They have been one of the top teams in Northeast Indiana for the last 5 years or so. I mean, they've won, 3 state championships in the process. Could have won 4 had it not been for, the virus that didn't play nice in 2020. But either way, this is a very, very, very good Blackhawk Christian program. And again, just like they've been all these years, they've always had this one dominant center that always kicks opposing teams' butts. And that is Kellen Pickett. He's averaging 20 points per game, 54% shooting. He can shoot the three, although that's not necessarily his strength. 66% foul shooter, averaging 11.9 rebounds per game, 3.6 assists, 1.3 steals, and 3.5 blocks per game. He is going to Wright State University for a reason. He is that good of a center for the Blackhawk Christian Braves, and how far Blackhawk goes in the state tournament will hinge heavily on not only Kellen Pickett, but also the playmaking ability of Bridge Pardon, the three-point shooting ability of a guy like Bryce Lacrosse, and even Bryce Sefton, who has been a little inconsistent at times for Blackhawk, but has shown moments and portions of being pretty good. But those 3 players for Blackhawk are going to be key for the Braves in this postseason run. And rebounding wise, they're averaging 32 rebounds per game. A lot of it is because of Kellen Pickett. 14.7 assists per game. Kellen's got 3.6 assists. Pardon 2.9 assists. Sefton 2.7 assists. Lacrosse at 1.6 assists. It's probably one of the most selfless teams in all of Indiana because of that. And then steals, not necessarily their game. They don't really force a lot of turnovers, but they don't really have to because Blackhawk is just so good in the interior that they don't necessarily have to force that many turnovers because they're just so strong inside. And then obviously they're averaging 6 blocks per game, in which half of it comes from Kellen Pickett. Again, Kellen Pickett is a big part of Blackhawk Christian's success, and if teams are unable to at least contain Kellen Pickett and somehow get him frustrated in some shape or form, nobody is going to beat Blackhawk Christian in this sectional because he is that tough of a center for the Blackhawk Christian Braves. So I think Blackhawk is a heavy favorite in this sectional because of that. However, I don't think Blackhawk is going to cruise in this sectional. I do think at some point somebody is going to test Blackhawk in this sectional. I don't know if it's East Noble. I don't think it's going to be Concordia. I don't think it's Leo. I don't think it's DeKalb. But if it's Garrett, if it's Garrett or Angola, I could see one of those two teams hang around for a half, maybe for 3 quarters. But I think somebody is going to test Blackhawk in this sectional. Whether if it's Garrett's or if it's Angola, maybe East Noble hangs around with them as well. But in the end, if the better Blackhawk team shows up, the Blackhawk Christian Braves are huge favorites to win this sectional, to which they've never done in 3A, but they have won so many postseason championships. It kind of feels like we expect Blackhawk to win this sectional, even though this is their first time in 3A. And finally, let's talk about 3A Sectional 20, hosted by Northwood. This sectional is, depending on how you look at this sectional, it's either a decently competitive sectional or it's kind of a mediocre sectional. It depends on if you think Northwood is a prohibitive favorite or if they're like, okay, they're pretty good, but there's a team that could sneak up on them. And it's a good enough sectional that I think teams can give Northwood some trouble in some shape or form. Northwood cannot look at this sectional and say, yeah, we're going to just cruise in this sectional. There are plenty of teams in the sectional that can be a problem for Northwood. Now, Northwood will be favored in this sectional just because they're probably the more consistent team in this sectional. You look at Northwood with the Everham brothers, although Maddox hasn't been 100% lately. We do expect him to play in this sectional, however. So we do expect both Everham brothers to show up for Northwood, Miles and Maddox Everham. You got Caleb Vincent, the point guard position, solid guard for the Northwood Panthers. You have, let's see here, you have AJ Furlow, DeAndre Monroe, Colin Edwards, Isaac Bell, Mason Pearson, Davis Everham, Ethan Sears, and then obviously Tyler Roush is the other 1,000 point scorers. They have 2,000 point scorers. Tyler Roush and Maddox Everham are 1,000 point scorers. Although Maddox Everham is a Wawa C transfer, just like Miles and Davis are. So that's kind of a somewhat of an asterisk for Everham, but not necessarily a bad asterisk. It's just he didn't spend all 4 years at Northwood. That's just the only thing with that. Ian Roush has been at Northwood his entire career. Nevertheless, it's a very talented Northwood team, and they are a very physical team, and they're incredibly well coached under Coach Aaron Wolf. They score 60 points per game. A lot of it comes from their size and their wingspan in the post. They're very good inside, and they only give 42 points per game. So their defense is excellent at Northwood. They do have a tough matchup against Columbia City on Tuesday night, the second half of a doubleheader. We expect Tippy Valley to beat West Snowball on paper. I as much as I like West Snowball, they are a pretty young team this year, and Valley is pretty darn good. They are probably one of the top defenses in the state of Indiana, so I don't necessarily like West Snowball's chances in that one. We'll talk about Tippy Valley shortly, but Columbia City is an interesting one. 14-9. They are a battle-tested team. You would expect that from an NE8 school like Columbia City. It's a team that's went through their ups and downs along the way. But they're starting to play some good basketball as of late. They won their share of the NE8, and they have 2, if not 3, really good players, if not solid players at the very least, in Owen Marshall, Stratton Fuller, and then Landon Richmond. And I think the big thing for Columbia City is if they're going to have a chance to go far in the sectional and win their first sectional in 9 years, they are going to need those 3 players to play well. Owen Marshall has to be one of the best guards in this sectional. He's going to have to be. We need to see Owen Marshall unleash his true potential. He's shown bits and pieces of it, but I think there's a level of Owen Marshall that he can get to in the next year or so. Stratton Fuller, you know what you're going to get with Stratton Fuller. He's a playmaker. He is that dude. He's going to show up in the sectional. It's just a matter of can he execute and can the teammates around him set Stratton Fuller up to succeed. Because he is a really good athlete. He will make plays. And then obviously, can Columbia City allow Landon Richmond to utilize his size and utilize his length and his wingspan to dominate in the low post? Landon Richmond is one of the best centers in Northeast Indiana, if not power forward. Landon Richmond's a guy that can stretch it out, but he is big, he's lengthy, he's got a knack for loose balls, and he kind of plays an old school, unorthodox type of approach in the post, which is something you don't see these days in this realm of basketball where it's becoming more and more of a perimeter-based offense. You don't see a lot of traditional bigs like Landon Richmond that can dominate the way he does. And everybody knows that Landon Richmond's game 80% of the time is going to be somewhere in the paint or somewhere near the rim. And yet somehow, some way, Landon Richmond continues to dominate inside. I don't know if he's just got that dog in him or what, but Landon Richmond flat out eats the paint when it comes to what he does at Columbia City. And I think Northwood is going to be tested big time against Landon Richmond. Now, they faced each other in the regular season, and that was a 13-point game in favor of Northwood. I do think Columbia City has been a better team since that game. And I'm expecting Columbia City to compete in this game on Tuesday. I expect them to be in this game. I expect them to give Northwood trouble. They are probably the one team in this section I look at and say they probably give Northwood the most trouble in this sectional because they not only have the size to compete with Northwood, not only do they have the defensive ability to compete with Northwood's physicality, not only do they have the offense that can maximize their ability to play to Northwood's aggressive ability, but Columbia City has the athletes to play with this team. Even if you go beyond those 3 guys, Caden Berna is starting to look better as of late. He has struggled with injury all year long. Caden Burnett is a guy that could come in and be a solid player off the bench for Columbia City. Trey Deckman has had moments where he can knock down shots at a decent rate. If he can knock down those threes, that's bad news for Northwood. You got the Clausen kid. He can make shots as well. Josh Eberly has had a clutch ability to make some plays on both ends of the floor. So Columbia City does have the athletes. They are far from a pushover in the sectional, and Northwood cannot take Columbia City lightly whatsoever. Anytime you play these teams like Columbia City, they have the heights, they have the athletes, they have that dog in them, so to speak. You cannot underestimate them. The NEA is a very good conference. They are probably right on par with the NLC when it comes to quality of basketball talent. You cannot underestimate Columbia City's potential in this sectional. The big thing for Columbia City, however, is they need some secondary scoring beyond Richmond and Fuller. If they get a third or fourth guy that can get you 8 or 10 points, I think that's bad news for Northwood. But if they struggle and they go in those cold spells and they're a little too sloppy with the loose balls, or they lose the 50-50 battles for loose balls, I do think that could be trouble for Columbia City as well. So they have to play well. They have to play well on the offensive side. They cannot go into cold spurts offensively. They cannot lose the rebounding battle to Northwood, and they got to be disciplined defensively. They cannot foul too much. They got to be able to defend without fouling when you're playing the Northwood Panthers. You got to make sure you're disciplined on both ends of the floor. And I'm expecting an intriguing matchup, which would set up a matchup with Fairfield on Friday. And I know people look at Fairfield and say, man, Fairfield's not all that great, blah, blah, blah. Actually, they're 13-9 this year, so they are playing some good ball as of late. They have won, 7 of the last 8 games. And anytime you have a Brody Garber team that's red hot, that is always bad news for opposing teams, because Fairfield in the playoffs with Brody Garber on that bench is always bad news. Fairfield is probably the one team I look at and say they could be a team that sneaks up on either Columbia City or Northwood. Fairfield's balanced. They got height. They're they have high motor kids. They can shoot the ball pretty well. Both Brant and both Garber kids, including Brant Garber, can knock down shots. Parker Smith is a bucket getter for the Fairfield Falcons. They got some tough kids. They're not a team that you look at and say there's that one guy you got to stop at all times. Fairfield's very well-rounded team. They play discipline. They're extremely well coached. They run a really good zone defense. Fairfield just doesn't shoot themselves in the foot. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of scared if I'm Northwood or Columbia City, because both Northwood and Columbia City, they're gonna be beating each other up on that first round game. And then you got this Fairfield team with that bye. You don't know what Fairfield team's gonna. You don't know which Fairfield team's gonna show up in that sectional. That could be scary for either of those two teams to play against. Is playing a Fairfield team that's playing really good basketball, quietly under the radar, but they can play a well-rounded game that can compete with the physicality of Northwood or the athletes of Columbia City. I'm fascinated to see who comes out of the bottom half of the bracket. Top half of the bracket, I feel like Tippy Valley is a pretty decent favorite to get the Saturday nights. I mean, Wawasee, sure, you can't necessarily rule out Wawasee per se. I mean, they do have a history of postseason runs in the past, but I don't find Wawasee to be particularly special this year. They're kind of vanilla to me with Wawasee. They have their good moments. They have their bad moments. They're just there for me. I'm not all that fond of Wawasee right now. I mean, sure, maybe they could win a round, maybe. But I don't think they'll win the sectional just because they don't have a player or two that can carry the team or at least lead a team to a sectional championship. I think West Noble can at least hang around with Tippy Valley. I like what Nolan Kelly has brought from the perimeter for West Noble. Jordan Esch is a very good forward for West Noble. They have some good athletes from the football team at West Noble, but I do think Tippy Valley's stingy defense is a cause of concern for West Noble, a team that has struggled to find consistent scoring for West Noble, because obviously they can defend teams, they can play good defense, they can play hard, they can compete with teams, but the offensive execution hasn't always been there for West Noble this year. And when you're playing a team like Tippy Valley that has an elite defense and some big time ballers inside. I mean, this is a really athletic Tippy Valley team. They're averaging 23 rebounds per game, but 8 of those rebounds come from their junior big in Stephen Akase or a case. I don't know which one is the actual pronunciation. Let's just say Stephen Case, all things considered. And then you got Ian Kutsi, the combo guard, averaging 15 points per game. I think that's a problem for West Snowball. On paper, a team that doesn't really have that type of athleticism or scoring ability that Tippy Valley has this year. So I think Valley will be favored to come out of the top half of the bracket, and I think it'll come down to who wins the bottom half of the bracket. I will give Northwood the edge. I will, I guess, but I am a little bit nervous about that matchup for Northwood. I think it's a pretty bad draw for Northwood because even if they beat Columbia City, Fairfield is far from a pushover, and Fairfield's got some pretty good kids. Like they can definitely cause some trouble for Northwood. They are a pretty good team in terms of shooting the basketball. They don't make a lot of mistakes, and Fairfield is red hot right now. Like they are scorching hot right now, are the Fairfield Falcons. So I think Northwood's going to have to play a good all-around game. They're going to have to play clean basketball, and they're going to need Ian Roush and the Everham kids to play very, very well, because I don't think Northwood's going to get an easy ride to the championship this year. Northwood has to play good basketball because the winner of this sectional is going to have a well-deserved sectional trophy coming to their school.